I'm Eggplant Evelyn with Food Literacy Center, and over the next few weeks we are going to be highlighting some of the recipes and activities that you can find in food anatomy activities for kids. Now, this is a book that has been written by Food Literacy Center founder and CEO Amber Scott, and the whole food literacy team contributed to some of the activities and the recipes that you can find in this great book. And today we are going to be seeing yeast in action by making some homemade bread. In our bread lesson, students will be able to learn about all different types of breads. They'll learn about leavened bread and unleavened bread and all about breads from all over the world. There's lots of great information in here. Our yeast in action activity has a whole list of materials and ingredients that you will need. It has step-by-step easy directions to follow with great pictures. It also gives you some great tips and a journal entry section. The great thing about bread is that the ingredients are really simple. It's just about the science to make it work. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Some of the ingredients, or the ingredients you're going to need, are going to be 2 cups of whole wheat flour. I have a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. We have a teaspoon of salt. I was gonna say sugar. We do also need a teaspoon of sugar as well. A little bit of olive oil. I have some extra flour here to dust my surface with. And of course, we are going to be needing our main activator, yeast, because we're gonna see it in action. Let's see if we can get a good, oops, I'm gonna lose some of my yeast in here. Maybe I'll put it on my palm so we can see. We have our yeast granules right here. And as we activate them, they're going to dissolve in some warm water, 3/4 cups of warm water, and a little bit of sugar. In the book, we learn that yeast eats sugar and the starches found in bread, and it belches out gas that causes bubbles and the dough itself to rise while it's waiting on the counter. So we're gonna be doing some of those things. I have my 3/4 cups of warm water right here. I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of my yeast, and I'm going to use the teaspoon to make sure I have the right calculations and the right measurements. And that's the thing about science, and as we treat this as a science experiment, we want to make sure that we're following all the portions and all the ingredients. So I have 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, and 3 teaspoons. We have our 3 teaspoons there, and we have our 1 teaspoon of sugar. This is going to activate our yeast. We need warm water, not hot water, just a little bit of some nice warm water. We don't want to cook the yeast or, mess with the activation process by having too warm of water. I'm going to mix it just with a fork just so we can mix everything up. And we are going to set this aside for 5 minutes. We're gonna come back to it. We're going to see if there's been a difference. What's the difference going on with our yeast? If you're watching at home, what do you think is going to happen with our activated yeast? You can put it in the comment section and let us know and see if you can predict what's going to happen. While we're waiting for our yeast to activate, we are going to mix our dry ingredients together. Now I have 2 cups. I have my 1 cup. We have 2 cups of whole wheat flour in here. I have a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So we're making whole wheat bread. That's where we're using our whole wheat flour. And it's just going to make a nice, healthy whole wheat loaf. And we need 1 teaspoon of salt. That's simple, just those 3 ingredients. So let's look at our teaspoon. We want a teaspoon of salt. And we're just going to lightly mix it just so everything's nice and mixed together. Another ingredient you want to have on standby is our olive oil. We're going to need a tablespoon of olive oil. So I have yeast that I've been activating for a few minutes already versus the one we just started activating. And I'm going to show you both of them so we can see what the difference is. So I have this one that I've been activating and this one that I just started activating. Can you tell me what the difference is? Look at those bubbles. You can see all of the gas that's coming out of that activated yeast. And you can kind of start to see that this one that we just started, it's starting to have that layer of those extra gas bubbles in there. So you can take another close look. And this is the first time we're gonna see our yeast in action. It's eating that sugar that we've mixed in with the yeast and the warm water, and it's turning it into gas, and we can see the gas in here. This one has already been activated for a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and add it to my dry mixture. And this is where students, you can roll up your sleeves and use your arm muscles to knead out the dough. I'm going to show you how to knead out the dough. We are going to take a spatula and I'm just going to pour our liquid in here. And I want to also make sure that I get all of it in there because the yeast is important for our bread. I don't want any to stay behind. I want to try to get all of it in here. I'm also going to leave this one up here so we can see it rise throughout our video. Like I said, we're going to need olive oil, so we're going to take 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Right there, 1 tablespoon, and we're going to add it. And with a spatula, we are just going to go ahead and start mixing it, folding it in. Now, it's not going to be too wet or too dry. If it's too wet, you can always add a little bit more flour, maybe a tablespoon at a time. If it's too dry, you can add a little bit more warm water, maybe a tablespoon or 2 if you need to. But this should come together quite nicely. And you know, this week was actually the first week that I learned how to make bread using this very recipe. And I made a few loaves. I think this is a great activity to start learning how to make bread. And then once you get the basics down, you can do whatever you want with it. You can try lots of different bread recipes. So as you see, as I've mixed it, it's starting to come together. I want to see I want to try to get all that dry flour at the bottom. The nice thing is that yeast that we had added in here, it has a really nice smell. So if you're making this at home and we have our yeast that's already being activated, you take a smell, see what it smells like, and if you recognize it. So let's see. I think this is ready. Once it's come together, you can start using your hands. I have a little extra flour here, and I'm just going to dust my surface a little bit so it doesn't stick. And I'm going to just flip over my bowl. I'll add this right here. And I'm gonna start working it with my hands. So when we knead our dough, it's kind of a push and stretch and pull dance that you do with the dough. And actually, I'm gonna move this out of the way so you can see better. I'm going to fold it in and push it out, fold it in and push it out. And you're going to want to do this for a while, about 8 to 10 minutes. So students, or if you have students at home or kids, or if you're a student making this recipe and this activity, you want to make sure you really knead it well. It's going to turn more like elastic. It's going to be elasticy. It's going to be able to stretch and pull really nicely. We don't have time to stay here for 10 minutes to knead. I am going to knead it as best as I can for about another minute or two, just to show you how well it can come together. So bread does take time to make. It's not a simple, mix and put in the oven. Our recipe and activity also show you how long it takes. So this one says to put away around 2.5 to 3 hours to make this activity. And so you want to make sure you have that time. Now you can do other things in between. As you're gonna see, we're gonna let this rest for a while. It's called proofing. We're gonna let the dough rest. So as you can see, I've just started kneading it, but it's starting to become very pliable. It's elasticy, almost like Play-Doh. You can shape it really nicely. And what you're going to want to do when this dough is done after 8 to 10 minutes of kneading it is you're going to want to put it in a bowl. I have one ready here of olive, and it's lightly greased with olive oil. So you can see the olive oil's in here. I'm just lightly spreading it around. And we're going to place our dough in the center of the bowl. I like to also kind of cover some of the dough with that excess olive oil, just so it has a nice little oil on top. And we are going to cover it with some plastic. Now, you're gonna let this sit in a nice warm place in your kitchen. Maybe it's inside your oven when it's turned off with the light on, or in the microwave with the light on, just sitting in there, or just another warm place in your kitchen for 1 hour. We are going to see yeast in action again. So I have my dough that I've just put in here, and I have another dough that I've been resting for an hour. Let's look at the difference. What do you see the difference is? This one that's been sitting is a lot bigger, almost twice its size. So I'm going to cover this with a little bit of plastic, the one that we just made. It's going to sit over here on the side. And now we have this dough that's been sitting for an hour. And we're going to see the gases in here kind of disappear when we start to push down on it. It's almost like deflating a balloon. I'm going to take it out. We have our nice little pre-raised dough. There's gases in here, and as soon as you start to poke them out, or you can also kind of punch them down like this just to get rid of all those air pockets, because we are going to knead the dough one more time. We saw all those gases in here. We're going to push them out. And really, you only need to knead your dough for about 2 minutes. Just want to make sure all those air bubbles are out. You can see the dough is much more smooth now to work with. It's a little bit more lighter also. And you're going to want to knead it into nice little loaf like this. Just want to make sure you get all those air bubbles out, and that you have a nice little piece of kneaded dough. Now we're going to watch yeast in action for a third time. You're going to want to take a bread pan. This one's lightly greased. I put a little bit of olive oil in it. We're going to place our dough in here, and we're going to cover it with a wet or damp tea towel. I'm using paper towel. That's what we have around here. So you can cover it with a wet paper towel, and that'll help keep the moisture in as the yeast activates again in this dough. And let me just show you the difference. We have one that's been resting for 30 minutes. So we have our dough that we just added, and this is, I wish this one was clear. You can see it's about twice the size. It's raised, it's ready to go in the oven. I'm gonna put this to the side. I'm gonna put this in the oven so you can even make maybe little cuts on the top if you want. Just to be a little bit decorative, we can have little cuts like this. And I'm gonna put it in the oven at 400 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes. If the top starts to get a little bit too brown, you can put a little bit of foil, some foil here on the side just in case. You can just cover the top with foil so it doesn't get too burnt. So after we put this in the oven and it's ready to go, you should come out with a nice, beautiful loaf of whole wheat bread. So we've seen yeast in action 3 times, but we're also going to see the evidence of yeast inside this baked bread. So I'm gonna cut a slice off of this. It's nice and done. It's not too brown. I'm gonna use my claw so I don't. And this is one of the other places that you can see our yeast in action. We actually have a big, nice little big bubble in here. But when you look at bread, even store-bought bread, it has all these little sponge-like holes. And those are the little gas pockets that the yeast made. So when it's done and you cut it open, you can see all of the little holes that the yeast made in our bread. And that's how easy and simple this recipe is. Like I said, it's a simple whole wheat loaf bread recipe. Once you master this, you can go on to sourdough and rye and really try lots of different breads. Maybe you want to make a bagel or a pretzel. Well, you can find other activities and recipes in Food Anatomy, activities for kids. This is available on Amazon to pre-order. There's a link in the description. There's so many activities. There's activities for foods you pick and foods you grow and sweet foods and foods you drink. There's so many activities and you learn about foods from all around the world. And this is just one of them. Now that you're done with your bread, you can maybe make a sun butter and fresh fruit sandwich. Maybe that's all I'll have for lunch today. Thank you for joining me watching Yeast in Action, and we'll see you next week with another fun activity from our great book. Thank you guys for joining us.